we're live talking about in the green room about getting old. So, so there we go. But we're really here talking about Wandering Souls with Cecile Pin. Hi, Cecile.
Hi, everyone.
So
Hello.
Happy to have you. Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Good. Like I was saying in the green room, it seems like it's been a while. I'm going to fill a little bit of time until Facebook lets everybody know that we're here when we're live. If you're joining us on YouTube, bear with me a little bit. We're not live with you, but you're in for a great conversation. So stay with us on YouTube. Just real quick, we haven't, because it's been a while, Jennifer, since we've seen you, because I'm always going to do virtual events because I just think that they're awesome. And I get to host authors like Cecile, who probably, I think, Cecile, you are in the UK, if I'm correct?
Yes, I'm in London. So it's 8 p.m. for me now, actually.
Okay.
Oh,
so you're in London. Jennifer's in San Diego. I'm in San Diego. Probably would have been hard to get you here to San Diego for an event in person. So this gives us the opportunity to highlight this great book that if you see this little sticker, Jennifer and I have a little different copies. Jennifer's is the hardcover, which just was released. Was it this Tuesday or last Tuesday?
Tuesday, actually.
This Tuesday. Okay. So just hot on the shelves. But it's got this little, I don't know if you could see it. It's hard to see, but it's got this little Indies Introduced little sticker here, which means that this was chosen by a panel of independent booksellers across the country as one of 10 titles that they are highlighting this season. Yeah.
Nice.
And so this means that, so this has got some serious indie love around this book.
Well-deserved too.
Well-deserved.
Yeah.
I mean, I was telling them in the green room, I had the pleasure of reading this in a manuscript form. Thank you, Henry Holt. And thank you, Holt, for allowing us to host today. And I just loved this book so much. Oh, I can't tell you how much I love it. I can't wait for this conversation. So let me get out from the screen quickly. Couple of quick things. Warwick's is located in La Jolla, San Diego. If you're in San Diego, we'd love for you to come by and pick up the book. But I'm going to be chatting with you in Facebook. In that comment section, I'll put the link on how you can order that book and have it shipped to you. Also in that comment section is where you're going to put any questions that you have for Cecile. Jennifer and Cecile are going to talk for about 35-ish minutes, something like that. And so don't be shy. We love the audience questions as well. So if you have anything, pop it in there too. And I'll be chatting with you in there. So let me introduce Jennifer real quick, who will introduce Cecile, and we'll start the conversation. So Jeniffer Thompson is a personal branding expert, digital marketing strategist, and publishing consultant. She is an author and speaker who delivers strategy-rich content and actionable tools that educate and empower authors. She co-founded Monkey See Media in 2004, an award-winning book cover and website design house. She is also a co-host of the Premise podcast, co-founder of the San Diego Writers Festival, and serves on the board of the San Diego Memoir Writers Association. With that, ladies, have a great conversation. See you in a little bit.
Thank you, Julie. So I am honored to be here with Cecile Pin today. Cecile Pin grew up in Paris and New York City. She moved to London at 18 to study philosophy at University College London and received an MA at King's College London. She writes for Bad Form Review, was longlisted for their Young Writers Prize, and is a 2021 London Writers Award winner. Wandering Souls is her first novel. Congratulations on this incredible debut. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, I'm glad everyone's here because this is going to be, I think it's going to be a really good conversation. I did want to tell everyone that this book, I just saw today that your book appeared on the 2023 Women's Prize for Fiction. It was longlisted. So congratulations on that as well. You're getting a lot of play, getting a lot of accolades, and people are loving this book. So it's
thank you so
pretty
much.
Awesome. So Wandering Souls provides an intimate look into the Vietnamese refugee experience and the psychological and emotional tolls of survival and cultural assimilation. It begins in Vietnam in the 1970s and follows a family who's forced to flee their homeland in search of a better life. Hopefully, it's a story of immigration, survival, family, ghosts. But ultimately, it's about hope, isn't it, Cecile?
I think so, yeah. It was very important for me that hope kind of shined through the book. And I've had a lot of people come up to me saying that they they cried when reading the book, but also that they were happy that it ends on quite a positive and hopeful note. So that was quite important for me.
Nice. And am I to understand that this story is based on your family history?
Yes, so it's partly based. The novel I would say is fictional, but my mom is a Vietnamese boat people who left. She was actually stationed in Laos at the time, but she left Laos and then immigrated to France in the late 70s. And she spent about a year at a refugee camp in Thailand. But I decided to set the book in the UK because I've lived here for almost 10 years now, and I used to work in publishing as well, and I realized that there were very few stories exploring the Vietnamese boat people that came to the UK after the war. So it's really something that I wanted to explore, and through doing my own research, this book kind of came out.
Well, I was going to say, like, what made you decide to tell this story? Like, what was the impetus?
I think there's a few different elements that came together at the right time that got me to write the book. The first is that it was during the pandemic and I had a bit more free time, and I just realized that now was the time to write this book. I think I had my mom's story for a long time. So my mom, I should have said as well, she like in the book, she lost her parents and half of her siblings while on the journey to the camp in Thailand. So I think I've had that sort of almost grief in me for a long time, and that sort of story within me, and I've always wanted to write about it, but I wasn't sure how. I think at first I was maybe interested in writing about it in a nonfiction way, so writing an essay about the Vietnamese boat people, or studying, like going and do a PhD about that history. But then I think I just became more interested in writing fiction, and so I was doing a lot of research, learning more about the boat people who came to the UK and that history, and just in general about what happened in those days. And I think I just began writing, really, and I think it came also at a time when Great Britain was quite divided. Brexit had happened, so I was also kind of reckoning with my own place as a migrant in a way in the UK, and so that's another reason why I decided to set the book in the UK, was kind of to look at displacement in this country. So yeah, different elements, I think, that just came together.
Well, I was going to say the hybrid narrative that you chose for this book is really fascinating to me. And as I was reading it, it was even a little jarring. Like the first time I hear from this unnamed narrator in the first person, I was like, whoa, it kind of caught me off guard. But it's actually brilliant the way you tie it all together, because it gives you this ability to tell the reader about things that really happened. So you're talking about the here and now, and then we have our fictional characters based, in a time that really happened. It felt so personal to me on so many levels. Talk to us about this process of bringing this unnamed narrator to the fictional side, if you will.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, the book has a bit of a fragmented narration. So you've got the main narrative thread with Anne, Tan, and Min, who are the three siblings who moved to the UK in the late 70s, early 80s. And then you also have the voice of Da, who's their diseased little brother, who kind of speaks to them from a place from beyond. And then you've got Jane, who's an unnamed narrator who's trying to piece together her family story and doing the research. So it's a bit meta in a way, because she's trying to learn more about Vietnamese boat people, and she's also trying to learn more about the process of grief and generational trauma. So you have those kind of like essayistic chapters within the book. And I think I wanted to have that fragmentation because that's really how I learned about my family history. I think it's something that lots of second generation refugees can identify with, is that it's not a story that was given to me at birth, right? It was something that I had to piece together through little like bits that my mom would tell me throughout the years. She would tell me like one event that had happened at the camp, or that my dad would tell me, or my uncles would tell me, and it's really a story that had so many gaps. And I also had to fill in those gaps by doing my own research, as I said, and learning more about the camps and the journey that the Vietnamese boat people undertook. And I think I wanted to reflect that kind of fragmented way of storytelling in the book.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you really, I mean, I think that's why it feels so personal and visceral and poignant in so many ways, because it is your story in a lot of ways, right?
In some ways, yeah, I think so. I would say like the characters are fictional, and it was quite important for the characters not to be based on my mom and uncles, and I
Hmm.
really wanted them to come from me. And I think changing the setting allowed me to do that. But there's in the
Sure.
ending narrator, she's there are obviously like some bits sort of based on me, and she's kind of reckoning with the responsibilities that she's struggling with when, writing and learning about her, that history that holds her. And it's, some of those emotions were also things that I was dealing with, right? So
Sure.
so there
Yeah.
it's a very personal book while still being fiction, I would say.
Well, and I wonder too, like the amount of research you did. I mean, you went into some dark subject matter doing this research, and I'm just curious how you managed to balance, the emotional weight of that and not let it affect you personally. Like how was that process for you in trying to maintain that hope but allow yourself to go into those dark places?
Yeah, it was definitely challenging at times, and I was writing the book while having a full-time job, so it was usually me at like 1 a.m. in the
Wow.
dark, like learning about those horrible things. So, I was learning, for
Mm,
example, about the sexual assault that would have happened sometimes in the camps, and just the, you know, yeah, I won't go into details, but just some sort of really darker sides of things that happened to the refugees, and it was quite draining. It was during the pandemic as well, so I think I just it's a bit boring, but I just try to like talk to my friends at least a few times a week, and when it was in lockdown, like go to the gym and try and have like 7 hours of sleep, if I could, like self-care. And then I
yeah,
think
yeah.
also, because the book has this fragmented narration, I didn't write it in a chronological linear way. I could kind of go and work on the more hopeful ending if I wanted to, and then
That's
take a
true,
break from the
yeah.
first part, which was a bit more, I think, mentally draining to write. So I just took some breaks, and I'm just surrounded by lots of good people, and my agent was supportive, and my friends,
Nice.
and so I had a good like support network, I think.
Did you sell this book as an idea or did you write it first?
I wrote it first. I had a, a draft, so I think I wrote about 2,000 words when I got into the London Writers Awards in January
Mm.
2021, which is a sort of program where you have feedback groups. So I was in a feedback group. So every few weeks I would submit another 2,000 words to my peers, and they would give me feedback. So, and I think that really allowed me to take my writing more seriously and actually get to actually writing the book, because before that, I think in 2020 it was so easy for me to just not write. um
Right.
and so so I had a first draft by the summer of 2021, which is when I got my agent, and then throughout the summer we kind of worked on the draft and added a few things and everything, and then we sold the book in end of August of that year, I think. So yeah, so we had a
Nice.
full, and then obviously we did some more edits, but we had a full manuscript.
And is it true you were working as a editorial assistant at the
Yes,
time?
yes, I was working at Penguin Random House in the UK at Jonathan Cape, it's called.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, what has it been like to be on the other side of the publishing table, if you will? Be the writer now, going through the editing process and also being part of the whole marketing
Yeah,
campaign.
it was odd, I think. So I left my job in October of last year, so I've been kind of full-time writer for about 4 or 5 months now, which is
Congratulations.
thank you. I was like,
Yeah.
this is my one-time shot at publishing my book, and I just wanted to give it 200%. And I might have to go back at some point, but I just wanted to do that. But it was odd doing both at the same time, because
Mm.
I was so overly conscious, I think, of how publishing works. And I think at
Yeah.
first when I got the deal, I was a bit scared that I would be like micromanaging everything and like being very picky about covers and like blurb and everything. And I was like anxious about being like anxious, and because
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I hate being annoying. But I think actually quite early on, because I had really good team both in the US and the UK with Henry Holt and Fourth Estate. So I think they just made it quite easy for me to take a step back, and I just really trusted my teams. And it was quite a smooth process. I feel quite lucky. I always hear about like, authors, not being happy with how they're published, but I've been quite happy. So it's been nice. And
That's
obviously I think, yeah, and I think being in that world also meant that I was a bit less anxious because I knew how it worked and I knew,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that kind of made me less anxious in some ways as well.
And then of course you are thrust into the marketing side of it, which is a whole nother ball game, right?
I think so. Yeah. I don't know how different marketing is in the US, but I think it's been really funny, like doing publicity for sure and doing events and I think just kind of seeing your book make it out in the world and having readers, like the blogging community has been really supportive, which I was very happy about, and just seeing the kind of the design process and everything. It's been really, yeah, really great.
I noticed that the UK version of the cover is quite different, which I actually love the UK version. I
Yeah,
don't know if you have it there.
I have it here, so it's quite
I
different, isn't
love that. Yeah, it's
it?
quite different. And I think
Yeah.
it's so fascinating how the covers are so different from the UK and the US market. Can you talk to us a little bit about that process? And did you have anything to do with it? The UK version was designed first, I assume, and then this version came out. Were you as happy with this version?
Yeah, so I sent both my UK and US editor a kind of PDF with some covers of previous books that I really liked and that I wanted to
Hmm.
maybe like follow their directions a bit. And then I also sent a few covers that I didn't like, just to kind of so they had an idea of what I liked and didn't like. And then I kept the brief quite vague. I told them that I liked kind of like a big font,
Mm.
and that I wanted to steer clear of too many exactly. Um, I I wanted to steer clear of too many like Asian stereotypes as well, and I kind of wanted the cover to have a fresh feel to it. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I was really happy with both. I think the first cover that the US showed me wasn't quite like right, so we had one go that didn't work out, but then this one was the second one, and I was very happy with it. And I love the kind of faces and the characters, I don't know if you can see,
Ye-
but
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that part. Talk to us about the title. Was it always Wandering Souls? Tell us how you came to that.
Yeah, so uh, the title is a reference to Operation Wandering Soul, which was a psychological war operation that the US Army undertook during the Vietnam War, which sort of played on the Vietnamese belief that if you don't bury your dead properly in their hometown, then they're left to wander for eternity as wandering souls or ghosts.
Yeah.
And so, what the US Army did near the end of the war, which is that they would play those tapes in the jungle, which play those really weird, like ghoulish noises that were supposed to be the voices of diseased Viet Cong soldiers that would say things in Vietnamese like "comrades, um, go home, like look at me, I'm dead and I'm can't breath properly," or just you can listen to it online. It's called Ghost Tape Number 10. It's really hard for me to recreate. And so I think the title was a reference to that, and also a reference to obviously Dao in the book, who's a wandering soul. But I think all the characters in their own ways are sort of wandering souls because they're a bit, they're finding themselves in the UK, which is a country they don't really know about. It's not the country, they the siblings wish they had been relocated to the US, but for some sort of twist of fate, they find themselves in the UK. And they're a bit aimless and they're not really sure what direction their life is
Yeah.
taking. So I think all the
Yeah.
characters in their own ways are a bit wanderers. So that I thought the title would be a nice way to kind of reflect on that.
It really is. It's a perfect title for the feel of the book and this underlying message, of what the immigrant experience too. So you did such a good job of bringing us into that experience. And there are two things I want to talk about. One of them is food. You did such a good job of like what it must be like to suddenly be not only in a place that has totally different weather. In fact, I want to talk about the snow scene too, but we'll stay with the food right now. So, An is looking for food that feels like home, and she's struggling to find these certain fruits and certain foods that will help her brothers feel at home, this comfort food. And talk to us about how important that is, for the immigrant experience when you go to another country and you don't have access to those foods.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting to see because especially in the, I'm not sure how it was in the US, but in the early 80s, 70s, there was a very small population of East and Southeast Asian people. So it was very, I think, lonely for them. And I think, yeah, food plays a big
You mean the
culture
1970s, right?
Yeah. What
In the
did I say?
1970s? You said
Yes,
1870s, but I just want to be clear for our readers. She means 1970s.
yeah, I mean, I said maybe the 80s and 70s. Yeah, 1970s
Yeah.
and 1980s. And so I think it must have been, you know, quite lonely for them to find themselves again in this new place. And I think food plays a big part in Asian culture as well. You know, you see that in books like Crying in the H Mart by Michel Zauner. And for me as well, it was because I grew up in France, it was such a way for me to connect with my heritage, right? That it wasn't really accessible to me, you know, when I went outside. So so I think I included lots of scenes of food just to because I think it's also a very sensory experience. You know, you have like smell and taste and sight and feel, and I think it evokes a lot of memories. And for the siblings, and I think for the siblings, it would just be a way for them to connect and to reminisce about their life in Vietnam and to reminisce about their families, and it's also a way for them to bond with them, you know, with their friends at the camp and you know their sort of roommates at the camp. So I think that's and I like so the book goes into the present day, and in the present day, what's nice to see is that the UK and London now is much more multicultural. You've got Chinatown and you've got supermarkets and Vietnamese restaurants and so on. So I was also interested in showing that progression.
I think it's also interesting how food gives, you know, myself being from America, like I get to experience immigrant culture through food. So, you know, it serves both purposes, I think, in bringing people together and bringing community together. And so it was really well illustrated. And I loved how, you know, Anne doesn't know how to cook. She's 16 when this whole journey begins. And so she's trying to figure out her life and how to make for her, you know, a good life for her brothers and also learning how to cook. And they sort of are intertwined, right? In her experience.
Yeah, I think Anne is someone she's always trying to do the right thing, and she's finding herself at 16, you know, an age where usually you're more concerned with like, you know, grades at school and boys boys, of course, and all those things. And I think she's conflicted because she wants to be that teenager and she wants to be a child, but she also feels that burden that she's now the caretaker and the parental figure of her two younger brothers. And I think she puts a lot of pressure on herself, cooking, which is something that she saw her mom doing, something that she used to help her mom with. And so I think that kind of conflict and dutiful nature is reflected in the cooking scenes in the book.
And then there's Ba and Duck, and they become sort of their surrogate family. And I think it was an important part of the story to give us a sense of belonging. Talk to us about how these characters came to be.
Yeah, so I think it's so important to show that family can be more than just blood ties. It's also just bonds that you create for experience and those things. And I think there was a feeling of maybe a bit of claustrophobia at first in the camp in Hong Kong when it's really just the three siblings together. But then once they get into the camp in Sopley, which is a camp they went through in the UK when they first arrived, they meet Duke and Ba, which are two Vietnamese refugees. And it's something that I grew up, you know, my mom also, when I was when we were in France, she still has those friends that she made in the camps, that she made on her journey there. So it was important for me to show that aspect as well of kind of solidarity and kinship. And just, that, you know, you can have all kinds of different families, I think.
Absolutely. Has your mom read this book?
She did, yes. She read it at the end of last year. I gave her an early copy and I was very nervous about what she was going to think. But she was very gracious about it. And I think it was obviously hard for her, especially the first part, which deals more about the death of the family. But I think she was happy that it ended on a hopeful note. As we said, she liked that it had some moments of joy. Um, and I think yeah, and she also said, I was quite relieved when she said that. She said that it looked as if I was there at the camp, and because I was quite nervous about the research and I was really stressed
Sure.
about getting like all the details right. So, but she said that I did a good job on that front, so I was happy.
I'm glad to hear that because it felt like it. I mean, again, it felt so intimate, like you were absolutely there and this was your experience. So you did well. I'm glad to hear she was happy.
Thank you.
So I mentioned a little, yeah, I mentioned a little earlier that when Anne and Tan and Ming arrive in the UK, they see snow for the first time. And this experience in the book of reading this, like I was so there, and there was this excitement, but also this fear and this strangeness. Talk about this scene, and is it based on a true memory of your mother's, or where did you get this scene from?
It is actually, it's something that she kind of, again, told me in passing, like a few years ago, where she was just like, oh,
Mm.
I remember when I saw snow for the first time, I was like really surprised. But it's not something like she ever like expanded on or anything, but I just, it always kind of struck with me because and I think it's such a universal thing. I mean, I still get excited when when you open the window and you're like, oh my God, there's snow there.
Yeah, yeah.
So
It's magical, isn't it?
yeah. And after like one day, I'm like, oh, it's actually quite annoying that there's snow, and it's kind of like, but I thought it would be such a good scene to show the characters as children and to kind of have a bit of breathing space, because up until that point in the book, you've seen them having so much hardship and grief, and I just really wanted for the characters and also for readers to experience that moment of joy and just see them, being playful, and they're also playing with them. So what the scene happens because villagers of near the camp asked them if they wanted to go play with their children in the park. And so it was also a way for me to show that there were some people in the UK who were very welcoming to them, and show again that they did experience some racism and discrimination, but everything is not black and white, right? And they had some wonderful people trying to help them and welcome them. So I'm really glad that you like the scene, because it I really wanted it to play that kind of role of showing just a bit of happiness in their lives.
Yeah, and they did have happiness. I mean, it's a nice balance. It would be a hard book to read if you hadn't balanced it in that way. And you did. You absolutely did. It's a page turner for sure for all of our listeners. It's a great book. Let's talk about your experience as an immigrant, because I know you moved to the UK from France when you were 9 and you didn't speak English.
Yeah, so I moved to New York
I'm sorry,
when I was 9.
you moved
Don't
to,
worry.
my bad. You moved to New York from France? Yeah,
Yes,
when
I
you were
moved
9.
here from France when I was 9, and I didn't speak English or anything. So I learned through watching SpongeBob in the Disney Channel and all that. It's a miracle, really, that I became a writer. But it was I think at the time I was quite shielded from anything, and I just was having a great time in New York. I loved New York. And it's crazy how children learn so quickly, because I don't even think I realized that I was learning English, but I think by the end of the first year I was pretty much almost bilingual. So yeah, I think children just
Wow.
absorb language so quickly. And I stayed there for 4 years, and then I moved back to France. And I find it really hard to move back to France, because I think I was 13, which is a harder, I think it's easier to move to a country when you're 9 than it is to when you're 13. And I changed school and I had to make new friends and all that. But I think, yeah, those 4 years in New York were so formative for me, because I think it's what gave me, a love of the English language, and allowed me to go study in the UK when I was 18, because my English was good enough. So yeah, and then I moved to the UK when I was 18 as well, which was another kind of like migrant experience. And I think, yeah, people, I don't like it when people like criticize my English, and I also have friends kind of like make fun of my accent sometimes and all that, but I know it's out of love.
You have excellent, your English is excellent.
Thank you.
Surprises me.
Yeah, thank you. But then, as I said, Brexit happened a few years ago, which means that the UK left the European Union, and French. I got into the UK. I didn't need a visa, but now people who come from France need a visa. So again, it's that sense that the UK maybe is becoming a bit less tolerant of immigration and so on. So it was an interesting background to writing the book.
Yeah, I bet. There was so much happening during that time. I'm sure a lot of it fed this desire to tell this story, the diaspora of Vietnamese going to the UK in particular, because you don't hear a lot about that.
No, you really don't. I think there's just less. I think the boat people that came in the US and in France is in the six figures. I think it's more than 100,000, but in the UK it's more about 20,000, 25,000.
Wow.
So it's just less. And I think part of that is because of the history. Lots of Vietnamese refugees wanted to go to the US because of the link between the two countries, and same with France, because the Vietnam used to be part of a French colony, and I think a lot of them spoke French. So I think it's always linked to the history. But so there's just less written about the boat people in the UK, and I just really wanted to write about and learn more and write about that diaspora.
Yeah, you did a very, very fine job. I want to talk about grief. It's interesting how we treat grief in different countries, and grief is a big part of this book on so many levels. They're grieving for their country, they're grieving for their lost family members, they're grieving for who they could have been. And one of the things that happens that I thought was very interesting is when our narrator, who we later find out is Jane, mentions Martha Nussbaum, and you mentioned studies in these narrative pieces. Talk to us about how that was important to you to tell the reader about grief and how different cultures approach grief and how we heal.
Yeah, so the Martha Nussbaum came from when I studied philosophy. I had a teacher who did a class on her and on grief, so that's how that bit came about. And then I've always been quite fascinated in how different cultures treat grief. So you have a book, and I think it's something that through different cultures and time as well, the dead, we always have a lot of respect for the dead, right? Like there's a chapter that talks about the Iliad and how kind of even in Greek mythology, you have that want to bury the dead properly and to treat them with respect. And I find that so interesting how that really transcends all cultures, but how also there are some differences. And I think a big central to the book also is the ancestor ceremony that Vietnamese people do. And the ancestor ceremony is important in Vietnamese culture because there's not a lot of a religion in Vietnam because it's a communist country. So really that kind of reverence to the dead and our ancestors is really important, and it's quite central, I think, to the culture, and it's something that I grew up doing. And it was always quite funny because we would lit the incense, and then it's not like a very serious thing, like we would buy like a specific brand of yogurt that my grandma would like and put it on the thing so that she could eat it in heaven, and we burn like those heaven dollars as well so they can have money in heaven. So I thought that was just quite interesting how that's such a big part of that culture, and whereas I think in growing up in France, it's a bit more sober, I think, in a way, grieving. But in Vietnamese funerals, you've got people like taking photos of everything, and it's just a bit different. And I wanted to explore that side of things as well in the book.
One of the things I really enjoyed about you bringing that experience to me, not having any experience with it myself, of course I've heard about, the idea of burning the incense and bringing the food and all of that, but then we got to hear how that affected Tao and our ghosts. And suddenly it became a totally different experience for me. Like Tao's experience throughout the book and where he's coming from, our ghost, added such a layer and such a depth to this book. Where did you get the idea to bring Tao to life for us? And was this a process, or did you know that this would be part of it from the very beginning?
I think I knew from the beginning that I wanted to include that voice, especially after reading about Operation Wandering Soul. I was just quite fascinated in the side of the ghosts, right? And I love reading ghost narrators. I was really inspired by works like Human Acts by Han Kong, or Hotel World by Ali Smith, who have ghost narrators as well. And and I did the spacing of the book for Dow's parts are quite a bit messy on the page, because I thought that would help reflect the idea that he's wandering and he's not really settled in one place. And it was a bit of a challenge to get his voice right, and I had some weird conversations with my editor about like ghost metaphysics, because it's like he's a child, he's 5 years old, but then because he's there you go,
can you see it? I'm not, there we go.
I can see, so the pages are a bit like that.
I saw it as poetry,
because
it was very lyrical.
That's very flattering. I'm no poet, and I so I don't want to say poetry because but I guess some people will read it as poetry, but it was getting that voice right between him being a child and 5-year-old, but also because he's a ghost having a bit of wisdom and that sense of timelessness. So getting his voice right, I think took a few drafts.
I would very much like to hear about the editing process. And, you mentioned in your acknowledgements that it became a better book with each editor. But was there ever a time when you thought, no, you don't get it? Or was it always like, oh, yes, that's great advice? Like, how much back and forth happened there?
Yeah, I think because I had worked in editorial, I was aware that sometimes you just got to listen to advice and you got to be a bit flexible, even though it's not always enjoyable. But it was interesting when I was having conversations with different agents, because I had some agents who wanted to represent me, but who said, I want you to lose the Tao parts. I don't think they're right. And I had some agents saying, I love the Tao parts, I want you to add more. So I mean, it's just so subjective, right? And I think from the start, I had an idea of what I wanted the book to be, and I knew that I wanted the Tao parts, and I knew that I wanted the book to have this fragmented narration. And I knew that it wouldn't work for everyone, but I think you can always tell when a writer is having fun and when a writer, likes what they're doing. And so I wanted to keep, that part because it was quite dear to me. But then I think with my editors, I had 2 really good editors, and both the US and UK ones worked really collaboratively together. So I think, again, just knowing that I had, like, when I was getting a comment, it came from the 2 of them, I think made it, gave it a bit more gravitas, because I was like, okay, if they're both thinking that, I need to change that bit. So I think a lot of the editorial work came into adding more of the narrative thread of Anne, Tan, and Min, and really adding more dialogue, because I kind of struggled with dialogue at first. So just making that part a bit, adding more life to it, I think. But we were never really in conflict. I think it was quite a smooth process, and they never, I think if I kind of refused to do a small thing, they never forced me to do anything. But I took on, I think I mostly listened to their advice.
Nice. That's beautiful when that happens, you always hear about people saying, I had to kill my darlings, and how painful it is to get rid of the pieces that you love so much. But I think it was probably helpful for you to be an editorial assistant. You knew the process, so you expected it too.
So. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a wonderful book. I want to know what you're working on next, what we can expect next from Cecile Pin. Julie, come on and join us. I know you have questions.
I do. But let's hear about what's coming next, because I always love that too.
Yeah, so I am working on book 2, but it's still in the very early stages. I find it quite hard to write when I'm doing publicity and things, and it's been such an exciting month with the UK and US publication. But I think it will be more contemporary than book 1, and maybe a love story, but I'm not sure. So it's still a bit up in the air, but I'm gonna really work on it hard this summer, and I'm excited.
Nice. Well, I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Cecile. I appreciated having this conversation with you. Wonderful book.
Because that is the hard part when you're on book tour, either trying to write about something or I always love, it's like, okay, the book came out 2 days ago, and Jeniffer, I'm almost the same way. We really want to know what's coming next. As we finish this one.
You're like, I'm still working on this one. Come on, people.
We still have to populate, we still have to, and again, I'm so glad you brought up the Women's Prize. Congratulations on that. That is
Thank
amazing.
you so much.
That is truly amazing. So if anybody has any questions out there, pop those into the comments. But Jeniffer, you brought up some of the best things, because they were exactly what I was thinking too, because it's such a compelling story that you have just as starting it. But then when Dow's voice comes in, it's like,
whoa.
it's
Yeah.
just like, that was for me. I was like, then it just took because the book was here and then it just elevated it to a whole nother level for me personally. And I think for everybody else who's going to read it, it's just like brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And Jeniffer, I love that you brought up about the gift. So was that something that came in, like how they saw the gifts that were left for them? Was that something that you just totally made up, or, you know, obviously you have to make that up as far as what they think about it, but was it something that your relatives, when they were bringing gifts or when your research was something that they had talked to you about, what those meant to them?
Do you mean by gifts? Do you mean the sort of ancestor ceremony?
Yes. The ancestor ceremonies.
Yeah. So that's the real thing that I do once a year with my family. We just leave a food that we know they liked. For example, we'd leave like, you know, fruits that they liked and like bubble gum, because I think one, like my uncle, my grandpa liked bubble gum and things like that. So it depends, you know. It's just about leaving things that they liked in real life, and then we burn the incense so that they can you know, consume them in heaven or wherever they are. So I quite like that. Yeah.
It is. And it's something that I think, and you brought this up too, Jeniffer, I think it's just an older generation, because you said that your mom would just leave you like little snippets of, you know, she would just like, she wasn't like she would sit and discuss in detail with you. And I think that's something about that generation, don't you? That it's just like it happened to them, but they really don't want to, you know, they've moved on to a certain extent, but it happened, where we seem to be the ones that want to explore that a little more. Is that what you felt, Cecile, with your mom?
I think so. And I didn't want to push, because I imagine it's not the most joyous, you know, easiest thing to talk about for her. And I do think that she's someone, you know, she's lived through it. She didn't feel the need to kind of talk about it. But again.
But so glad that she loves the book. So glad. Have you visited Vietnam?
I did. I went there when I was about 14, 15. The north, we still had some kind of a bit of distant family there, and I really, really liked it. I want to go back actually, but it's you know, I don't speak the language, so I think I felt a bit like a tourist when I was there, which is, you know, so it was but it was interesting, I think, and I'd like to go back now. I think having researched the book and knowing more about my heritage, I'd love to. It's a very beautiful country.
Beautiful. My daughter did a semester at sea, and she said of all the, they went to like crazy number, and she said that is the one place that she will go back to. It's just gorgeous. It's a beautiful country. Okay, and you had me Googling while you were on here about the Wandering Souls recordings. I almost hit play, and I was like, no, I better not do that in case it crosses.
Oh boy.
But as soon as we are off this Zoom, I'm hitting play because it just sounds, oh my God, it sounds fascinating to listen to. I can't even imagine what that's going to sound like. So Jeniffer, you might be Googling after too.
I don't think so. I don't want to hear it. To me, like, I just felt so like, what an awful thing, you know, and I could hear it. It kind of haunted me for a couple of days after I read it, right? And I was just like, oh, the things humans do to each other, it's just mind-blowing. And we make it, somehow we like make it through, right? And we find reasons to love each other and find hope. And that's exactly what this book illustrates.
Exactly. And the thing that I find, Cecile, to your credit and to your brilliance in the writing, this isn't a big long book.
No,
you know, it's 223-ish pages, but you have evoked so many things in this, and the feelings that people have when they read this. It's just kudos to you on this. I just can't wait for what you have next. May your star rise to the keep rising.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. With that, we're out of time at this point. So, Cecile, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been wonderful. And thank you again to Henry Holt. Jeniffer, thank you. Another wonderful conversation as always.
Thank you. So, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Cecile, if you're ever on the West Coast, you know where to find us.
Definitely. I'd love to.
And cannot wait for the next book. So with that, bye everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.